It is no wonder that God did not send John, whom many regard as the last great Old Testament prophet, to the halls of the great. John could not have endured there. Even though Herod's son listened to him for a while, Herod allowed his stepdaughter Salome to cut off John's head. No, for the short time that John prophesied, John had come to plain, ordinary people. So what did John, who was quoting Old Testament prophet Isaiah, mean by, "Prepare ye the way of the Lord. Every valley shall be brought level, and every mountain shall be made low. Make straight the Lord's path"? Was he talking topography? Was he describing a surveyor who would come through and even out the landscape? Flatten out the gorgeous California mountains and fill in the hot summer valleys? If that were to happen, you and I could enjoy some of that lovely cool air blowing off the Pacific in the summer and maybe not be so cold in the winter. Or was John the Baptizer, John, the last great prophet, talking about a force that would be equal to the mountains of chaos that always seem to be ready to topple over us, and the valleys of despair out of which you and I can't seem to ever climb? But first, John gives you and I this charge. Straighten out the paths of confusion and red tape so that the Redeemer's way will not be impeded. You make straight the paths. You make straight the paths. Many of you remember the Robert Frost. I know I'm the oldest one here, but many of you remember the Robert Frost poem that some of us had to learn as children. Two paths diverged in a single wood. I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. Any of you had to read this? John, echoing the prophet Isaiah, calls upon those who would be awake and aware and who would hail and embrace the advent, the oncoming of God breaking into humanity as a child, to not just choose a path, to not just boldly take a path that somebody else has already laid out, as Robert Frost talked about, but to actually take hold of crooked, confusing paths and straighten them out, making new, accessible, correct, and safe and clear roads as we herald the Savior. How do we do this? We do this first by approaching old situation with new eyes and new ears. We listen even when we are tired of listening, especially when we are tired of listening. Even when it's on the tip of our tongues to say, we have never done this before. We have never done it this way before. Any of you see The Wiz on television this week? I watched it again on television a few nights ago. It was a live production of a show that came to Broadway in 1975. And in 1975, like I said, because I'm the oldest living person in this congregation, I knew just about everybody who was in that cast. And I went to see that show many, many times, and that show had a lot of issues with the newspapers because the newspapers said that there shouldn't be any kind of black telling of a cherished classical story on Broadway by an all-black cast. I remember it so well. What I also remember, as I look back on that show now, is that so many of the young men and women who were in that cast have died to AIDS. It was not so long ago that what was preached from America's pulpits was this: HIV was God's punishment for the hedonism of the sexual revolution. And when having HIV was a death sentence, that judgment seemed to have holy weight. But people took hold of messed up paths and started straightening them out. People started talking. Media started questioning. The stories of gay and straight people living together and confronting each other became the subject of Saturday Night Live and then mainstream TV and movies. Gay people and drag queens got laughed at and poked at and made fun of, but things were changing. Political and spiritual advocates of people with different sexual orientations began to find their voices and explain the human diverse experience in ways that other people could listen to and understand. And then, as people began to take hold of and straighten out those convoluted roads, all of us, the pharmaceutical companies, changed a death sentence into a chronic, livable condition. All kinds of people came out of all kinds of closets. Families were reunited and learned how to hold their heads up high in love. Fathers and sons were able to speak together and live together again. You may call it coincidence. I call it people making roads straight into compassion, allowing the world to focus on Christ's message that love conquers everything. Love conquers everything. What a Christ miracle. Lives were changed because minds were changed. Are we all on the same page with sexual orientation and HIV? Not yet. But that doesn't matter. There is continual, good, respectful conversation as great thinkers and great doers have not been afraid and have reached out and repaved roads, making them straight. San Bernardino is so close. There are people sitting in this congregation who know where San Bernardino Avenue is. There is a lady, Peggy Batty, who attends this church, who has a neighbor who was seriously wounded during the San Bernardino shooting. It's one thing to say our thoughts and prayers are with you people, but as with everything else that people have done, God is not going to fix this. People have gotten themselves into this mess, and once again, on this Advent Sunday, lifting up peace, Isaiah and John the Baptizer have called you and me as believers to make straight the pathway and the call for the progress of God. Did you know there are American Muslims who abhor the violence done in the name of Allah? In the name of God? Yeah, they exist. For those of you who are interested in contacting them or reading about them or reading what they have to say, type Muslims against ISIS in the search bar of Google or on your Facebook page. You will find articles and opinions and lectures and positions that you might not have known existed before. For some of us, it would be wonderful if a Muslim leader with the leadership style of the charismatic Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King suddenly appeared on the national stage and all moderate and progressive Muslims could rally behind her or him as she or he deplored terrorism, and you and I wouldn't have to do a thing but point and shake our heads and say, those are the good ones. But in this age and time, no homogenized Malcolm X exists. No such person has appeared for us to admire, to love or hate or be afraid of and say, you take care of this mess. What does exist is guerrilla warfare, much like the colonists waged against the British when America was fighting for her freedom. Shooting from behind trees and running off to hide as the British marched through in bright red uniforms. You and I are all involved and hurt and angry and resentful that this has come to our shores. And so we must all be looking and listening and reaching out as never before. God calls us to straighten the paths from our doorstep to the ends of the earth. Then God's Son may proceed forth for all of us to experience and to enjoy. You may call him the baby Jesus. Oh, the beautiful little baby Jesus. God's name for him is so much bigger. God called him Emmanuel, which means God with us. All of us. All of us. There was a tall gentleman standing in her place. As soon as he began to wait on me, I could tell he had an accent. And he told me his name was Amon. And I said, where are you from, Amon? He said, I am Persian American. And we got in the car together, the car that I had brought back. Now, he was driving it, so he was totally in control. And he was about your height, Wesley, so you can imagine how far back the seat had to go. And I said to him, just jumping right in, I said, so are you Muslim? He said, no, I am not. I am Christian. I came to this country when I was 19 years old. But everyone thinks that I am Muslim. I said to him, how do you think that American Christians and American Muslims can affect a closer working relationship together so that we are not so afraid of each other, so that we don't always call you a terrorist because you have an accent and you look Middle Eastern? He said to me, I think about this a lot, and what I have decided to do is self-locate myself. I understand that I am a Middle Eastern living in America in the 21st century when people are afraid of Middle Easterners. And in order to self-locate myself, I must cultivate and have at all times a really good sense of humor. Because even my friends who know that I am an American and I'm a Christian make Muslim jokes about me in my presence. He said, my friends who I grew up with in the Middle East, many of them were Muslims, and I can tell you they are lovely, gentle people. He said, every day when people walk into this shop and ask for somebody to wait on them to get a car, when they find out I have a Middle Eastern accent, some of them choose not to be waited on by me. But I have chosen to use my position in this place and in this time to engage in dialogue about who I am and what the world is like with people like you. He said that is the only way that a difference can be made. And he said, I hope, and he asked me if I went to church, and I told him I did, and I told him I was a pastor. He said, and I hope that your church is engaged in reaching out to people who are different than they are, telling them about who they are, and being willing to ask tough but respectful questions. Pretty good advice from a young man. Regardless of what happens around us, we have to keep a sense of humor, which is really a sense of connection, which is really a sense of faith, and use interaction as an opportunity to teach and to learn. Show ourselves that we are willing to change and grow, and as the Prince of Peace comes, straighten out his path.